It's Hollywood or history, unravel what they portray. Let's investigate, teaching truth, one frame at a time.
Welcome to the Hollywood or History Podcast, a podcast to help social studies teachers and teacher educators use film effectively in their classroom. I'm your host, Dr. Scott Roberts, and in each episode, we talk with a volume editor and lesson plan developer to determine the accuracy of their favorite films.
Hollywood or history, unravel what they portray. Let's investigate, teaching truth, one frame at a time.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Hollywood or History Podcast, World Religion. This is the fifth volume in the series. I'm here today with Dr. Tommy Malewitz and Mr. Adam P. Zoeller, who are authors and editors of this book. Welcome, Tom and Adam. Can you go ahead and talk a little bit more about your background, please?
Sure. Thank you so much for inviting us, Scott. So my name is Dr. Malewitz. I'm with Spalding University in Louisville, Kentucky. Did my PhD at Bellarmine University in Education and Social Change, but I've also had 11 years history with teaching in Catholic secondary ed. So I taught statistics, philosophy, and theology. And one of the things that really engaged the students more than anything else was using films as a springboard to talk about the topics that we're going to talk about. So I'm excited to be here today to talk a little bit about some of the assignments and lessons that we put in this volume. So thank you, Scott, for inviting me.
Yeah, great to have you. And we also have teacher Adam Zoeller. Adam, can you talk more about yourself, please?
Sure. Thanks also for having me this morning. I've met Tom teaching in the Catholic school system in Louisville, Kentucky, in the Archdiocese of Louisville. This is my 23rd year teaching in secondary schools. Like Tom mentioned, the opportunity to engage students in material, especially for visual learners, using film or film clips has worked well for me, from my experience. I currently work at Sacred Heart Academy, which is an Ursuline school in Louisville, and have had experience in secondary school and working with Tom and working with the Archdiocese of Louisville, teaching classes for adult faith formation as well. Even in those worlds with adults, using film or film clips has worked well to kind of engage a topic or to kind of open up or unpack different concepts.
Great. And for those who are listening to the podcast, the lack of gray in Adam's beard and hair, even though he's been teaching for 23 years, makes me very jealous. But congratulations on living a good life to get that gray out. But I thought I would have never guessed 23 years. Well, awesome. Well, it's great to have you all on board. Again, y'all wrote the fifth volume in the book series. And again, when you contacted me wanting to write the book, I was like, great, world religions is super important, not necessarily what I'm an expert in. So I was so happy that you two wanted to bring that to this series, because obviously world religion is taught in regular education here in Michigan. It's in grade 7 as well as high school. We certainly have states throughout the United States who are bringing in more Judeo-Christian information and text to their standards. And then obviously, like you said, there's a variety of different religious schools out there where world religion is certainly going to be discussed. So definitely a great, important topic to bring into the series. So let's talk a little bit about your book. Give the audience a better understanding of the different types of chapters and topics that you wrote about and your authors wrote about in the book series.
So one of the things we're hoping for with the volume is to have different categories. Depending on what the standards are and what the curriculum needs, we wanted to make sure that there was a variety of different perspectives that we could offer. Maybe historical individuals associated with religion, such as Gandhi or Malcolm X or Martin Luther King Jr., to just concepts, rituals, poetry. What are these things that lead in the background of these different ways of looking at the world? And in our world, as globalized as it is, we need to understand how those aspects engage in that conversation of politics, and that conversation of history, and that conversation of cultural reality. So we wanted to offer a few different types of films, such as comparing and contrasting Big Hero 6 with the coming together of such as the apostles. What does this look like? What is their backgrounds? Are there similarities? There's traditional films that have religious overtones, such as Fellowship of the Ring. the combination of some of the Marvel and superhero experiences of the hero's journey of the Dark Knight Rises, but we also wanted to look at experiences within religious perspectives. Not all those are positive. So when you talk about the residential school system of Canada, there's testimonial coming out from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that gives us another idea of history that we need to talk about, but from a springboard that will allow us, so it's not as controversial or powerful. So where can we hear some of these testimonials through documentaries, the stories of the developing of Special Olympics and ESPN 30 for 30 Brave and the attempt with Eunice Kennedy Shriver? What are these stories where religious imagery and virtue was present in these individuals?
And I would just continue on with that, Tom. The idea is, from my experience, is you have to look at your audience. And the audience that I've had an experience with over the years is in the Catholic school system, and they may know their Catholicism and their Christianity, but have very limited exposure or knowledge of other religions of the world. So to take the idea of a local study from Christianity, but then to make it more broad and more global, I think that's one of the themes of the World Religions book. I've had an opportunity to teach world religions for probably a dozen years, and from my experience, obviously the students, it is in a way similar to like a world language. It's something so different than their experience, the vocabulary, some of the history, as Tom mentioned. So trying to find ways to bridge a gap through different film or film clips to have them understand, as Tom said, rituals or other concepts in their own religion, I think helped from my experience using that. The world religions is a topic that to me I think is so important and very passionate about. And the students typically enjoy the class because it broadens their horizon, their worldview, to see the world more global, to see more we have in common as opposed to what we have that divides us culturally or through religion. So hopefully these different strategies in the book help to alleviate any sort of stereotype or any sort of judgments that students may come to the class with, and have a more open-minded approach at the end of the course.
Sure. And that's a great rationale for the book. Just for our teacher listeners, all the lessons in the book, what grade levels would you say those lessons were written for?
So a majority of them are going to be for secondary education, but there are a few that would engage 7th and 8th grade as well.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so we kind of talked about it already, but I just wanted to ask you, when you decided to write a book or edit a book about world religions, why? I know Adam just kind of briefly discussed it, but why world religions? Why should we be able to teach this, especially for those who are in a general public school where world religion is certainly a topic for that secondary grade band?
To try to make our the world we live in now with the internet and with social media, I mean, the students are already more, or have the opportunity, I should say, to be more global, to connect and interact with people. I mean, the generation that I grew up in, and maybe yourself as well, we didn't have this interaction with other people of different cultures or the awareness of different people in different parts of the world that we do now with news and news outlets and the media through the internet. So I feel like it could be an opportunity to once again dispel any sort of misinformation
Mhm.
or information that's been handed down from family, from media, from other friends, to actually like dig deep to see what are these people that worship differently than me, may look different, speak differently. What do we have in common?
Mhm.
And leaving a high school setting, a secondary school setting, to go on to college or career or military or wherever students may go to in the future, I mean, they will be exposed to so many different people in different religions, different backgrounds. I feel like it gives them hopefully like a leg up to understand how to interact, how to relate, how to converse with people. Even though it might be on a very small level because of their lack of experience, at least it gives a chance to open the conversation for dialogue
Mhm.
between religions and between cultures.
Great.
And I think one of the things to add to what Adam's talking about is that, through our own classrooms and the experiences with these lessons, it was one of the things where we recognized that the students were engaging the material through the introduction of film clips, much more than just the textbook alone. So when we're engaging these stories, we have this ability to develop media literacy. We have the ability to take them a little deeper and understanding what are the signs and symbols of not just the religion itself, but also what are the signs and symbols in the way that the director is telling a story, and how does that compare and contrast to primary documents and primary source documents of that religion.
Right.
I remember a little bit of an analogy. I remember in high school and even in college, I learned more about English and grammar by taking a different language. When I took Spanish, I learned more about structure, sentence structure, subject verb agreement, all those sorts of things. And I feel like the students have the opportunity to learn more about their own faith
Right.
by exposure to other faith traditions, to other key characters in scripture, to other rituals. And by examining or studying these other uh, concepts from other religions, they might realize that's similar to what I do. It may be called different, it may look a little different, but the end goal is the same, right? To become a person that builds character, moral character, someone who is faithful, someone who builds community in the world.
Yeah. Perfect. Well, so in the book series, we have the editors, which are you all, but a lot of times the editors of the books write their own lesson plans to go along with some other authors. Just an aside, y'all did ask me to contribute to this volume, and I said, "Whoop, this is way over my head. Star Wars and Buddhism, I don't get either, but no, I do get Buddhism. I don't get Star Wars. But I was very happy that y'all asked me to do it. But again, it wasn't in my expertise. But y'all did write several lessons in the book as well. And one of the lessons, which I think is absolutely amazing, is about the classic comedy Groundhog Day, starring Bill Murray. So can you talk a little bit more about that particular lesson? Give us a background of what Groundhog Day is, and kind of how you connected that to world religion.
Sure. The film, for those who are not aware of it, directed by Harold Ramis, I want to say it's 1993. It's about a character named Phil, Phil Connors, who travels to Puxatawny to do a news report on the groundhog on February the 2nd. The character is, to say the least, not too genuine, not too nice, treats people as they are less than he is, has obviously an inflated ego. And because of those factors, when he goes to this town to do the news report, he discovers that when he wakes up on February the 3rd, it's actually February the 2nd again, and he's stuck in this cycle of Groundhog Day, reliving the same day over and over and over again. For those who haven't seen it, it's a comedy. It's absolutely hilarious, and Bill Murray does a great job in delivering this character for the audience. The connection that we were trying to make is with Buddhism. Buddhism believes in the cycle of reincarnation, samsara, that a person continues to live and relive their life over and over again, in a way, to paraphrase, in a way till they get it right, till they understand how to really live a genuine, authentic life that is one in which respects other people. Part of the Buddha's Eightfold Path, there's 8 steps of how to live a life genuinely and authentically as a Buddhist. 2 of the 8 that we focused on in the chapter are right speech and right action. And the connection we're making is that Phil in this story in Groundhog Day has to learn how to treat people better through his speech, through his action, and that he lives in Groundhog Day, which is a metaphor for reincarnation, until he can act in a way that would be holy or good or pleasing or respectful, whatever word you want to use. So we examine the life of Phil as if he is in this Buddhist worldview, and that he's stuck until he can begin to live the Eightfold Path to the best of his ability. Keep in mind, obviously, the film is not based on Buddhism, but it's a good way of showing a contemporary model of a person who, using the concepts and the tenets of Buddhism, opens the door or as you will, maybe paves the way for students to understand those concepts a little bit better. So that is a little bit about like the rationale behind it.
Mhm.
And as you could look at Phil's character, and you can look at his own shadow, if you will, in terms of like the negative aspects of himself and how he's trying to overcome his own shadow, his own ego, his own sin, which would be a term we would use in Christianity to become better. That metaphor is played out in Groundhog Day. Obviously, the groundhog has to see his shadow, so there's a play on words there that can be used for Phil Connors, and then also the groundhog within the story itself.
And so for those who are watching the video and those, you'll have access to the PowerPoint that we're using to lead this discussion. And Tom and Adam did a nice job of linking some of the clips from Groundhog Day that they decided to use for their lesson. So we've already discussed in a prior episode the steps of the Hollywood or history strategy, where I did it solo. So I'm so glad to have y'all here with me. And the first thing that we talk about when it comes to step one, when it comes to writing a lesson like this, is finding national and state standards that frame the lesson. Can y'all talk a little bit about the national and state standards that you used for the Groundhog Day lesson?
Sure. I mean, when we're talking about national standards, when you go through the volume, you're going to see that we've included standards for Common Core, standards for 3 different states, as well as Common Core principles for media literacy in the United States. One of the unique aspects of our book is that we also included the standards for Catholic education. So the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, so that we connected it to the core of secondary Catholic schools as they needed as well. And so one of the things you want to do is make sure that the topic itself lends, not as outside the standards, but lends itself to a conversation and a dialogue within the expectation of the curriculum. And we're looking for those clips that do the best job of engaging that, so that a teacher is able to seamlessly bring these clips into their classroom. Adam, do you want to speak specifically about Groundhog Day?
Yeah, so many of the standards could be used in terms of reading standards and writing standards for the skill set required for standardized testing like the ACT. So trying to create a summative for this type of lesson would be that maybe some type of comparing and contrasting of Phil Connors in the story, and how his actions, how his speech reflect Buddhism at the end of the film, or how it did not reflect Buddhism at the beginning of the film. So looking at standards that require maybe to defend, or maybe to compare and contrast, maybe to evaluate the character development in some sort of writing of an essay or journal can be part of that process. To what Tom mentioned, that the media literacy is so important, and I'm glad that we had a chance to include those standards as well, because for those who are not experienced in using film in their teaching strategy, the way those standards are written through the National Media Literacy Education are very easy to understand. They're very, very basic, and they would give people an opportunity to experiment with using film and definitely making sure the film matches the standards.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the standards for the Catholic Church, obviously not every school that we're speaking to today or that would purchase these books are private schools or Catholic schools, but from our experience in teaching in a Catholic school system, most Catholic schools offer world religions as an elective,
Mm-hmm.
which was one of the reasons we thought this might be a good way to incorporate those standards as well. So if there was a teacher in a private or parochial school who wanted to use it, they already have ready-made standards for that course as well that they could use to see the value of other religions, to see interreligious dialogue, to see the opportunity of what, as I mentioned earlier, what unites us versus what divides us. So
Yeah.
The variety of standards gives an opportunity for so many educators in different experience level, different type of schools that they may work in.
Right. And in the book series, we encouraged all the authors to include the Common Core at the time, even though obviously we're going away from the Common Core, but those elements of writing, speaking, and listening, that kind of thing, are still embedded in a lot of public school standards. So these lessons are definitely focused on history, social studies. But language arts teachers could also, if they wanted to collaborate with their social studies colleagues, or even go on their own with a writing piece. And I think a lot of your lessons, including this one, do bring in those writing elements that an English language arts teacher could also take this lesson and use it as well. So, informational text, that kind of thing. So it definitely hits a broad variety of standards, not only for history and social studies, the Catholic Church, but also ELA. Great. So the next step in the process, as we say, is develop an interesting question. Now, Hollywood or history is already the interesting question. That would be, according to the C3 framework, the compelling question is how accurate is this movie, based on this idea of Hollywood being 100% fiction, history 100% fact, or somewhere in between. And we use history, but it can be for any social studies topic as the fact-based piece. But we also ask our authors to do a series of sub-questions about their lesson plan. So I was just wondering if y'all could talk a little bit more about those sub-questions that students will be able to answer by going through this Groundhog Day lesson plan.
Tom, you want me to go for that as well, or do you want to jump in?
Sure. Go
Okay,
ahead.
sure. I think what we're looking at, I mean, the overarching compelling question, if we go back to the Eightfold Path for Buddhism, those are not, I guess, literal steps to be accomplished, and then you move on, and then you kind of completed that and you're done. Those are steps in which that you live every day of your life, constantly and continuously. So the Hollywood or history piece, even though we've taken out just right speech, right action from Buddhism's Eightfold Path, yes, that applies to the film. But in actuality, if this character Phil was living the Eightfold Path, he would be living all eight in every aspect of his life. So other aspects of the Eightfold Path deal with, for example, right meditation, right, and right teaching, focus on the Buddhist teaching. There's no elements of that in the film that would echo or reinforce any of those themes from Buddhism. So yes, we're picking and choosing right speech, right action just to open up the conversation for students to understand concepts in Buddhism, but it doesn't reflect the entirety of what the Eightfold Path should be for a practicing Buddhist.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be one piece if we're comparing and contrasting Hollywood or history and the accuracy. That would be one that could work for sure. Some of the other secondary questions would deal with the reflections for students in terms of the temptations of life, or what makes someone egotistical, what forms a person to be developed in such a way that is not selfless, but instead selfish, and trying to not just look at the film, but also look at the person in the class, look at the student, whether or not they have any intention of studying Buddhism in the future, to reflect on those themes of that religion to their own life. And once again, by reflecting on it, they'll have an opportunity to see how maybe they are living aspects of it in their life or have failed to do that. And then the connection then can hopefully therefore go back to their own religious tradition to see those actions and being lived out in their life.
Excellent. Yeah. So again, for those who are listening, who are teachers, we provide in each of these lessons in the book, there's definitely a series of sub questions or supporting questions that you can use that go above and beyond the whole Hollywood or history, to help your students understand the topic that much better. So step 3, we talk about selecting your sources. And so can you just let the listeners know the different types of sources that you used when it came to studying Groundhog Day?
Sure. When we talk about selecting sources, this can be a challenging part of the lesson, because a lot of primary sources might be a little bit more intellectual than what some of the students are available for that time. So helping the students understand that we do need to go back to primary sources is extremely important. That research component, where is the evidence of what's there? So in some of the activities, you might actually go back to a scripture passage, or you might go back to something of that religious tradition. Or, with your secondary sources, you might have somebody that's commenting on that.
Right.
So maybe a peer-reviewed journal article, or a text, or some type of graphic novel that really engages them in a way that can speak to that topic. Specifically for Groundhog Day, what did you include, Adam?
The first sermon at Deer Park, which was noted as Siddhartha's first sermon, as having this awakening in Buddhism, focuses on to what's called the Four Noble Truths. The first of those is to live is to suffer, and suffering. The second one is suffering is caused by attachment. So the film does a good job of showcasing that without speaking of Buddhism, by showing the main character, once again, Phil Connors, as someone who is attached, not to maybe like any sort of earthly possession, but attached to his own ego, attached to his own sense of superiority compared to colleagues or other people in the world. He feels as if he's better than others and feels like he deserves more than others. So the idea is that he is suffering, and maybe not a physical suffering here, but some sort of emotional or mental or even spiritual suffering, because the way he views the world. His view is obviously narrow-minded and if some would say kind of backwards and selfish. So the way to remove suffering is to remove attachment, according to the Buddha. And Phil eventually gets to that place as he realizes the need to care for other people. And he realizes it's not about him per se, but it's about other people. Another source, and the legend is that when the Buddha was reflecting in his life, he was tempted by what's called the demon Mara. And Mara is not like a Satan figure in Christianity, but more a psychological temptation. And the Buddha was trying to overcome his own psyche, if you will, his own temptation about his life and his goals. There was a tension in his life from what he wanted to do historically and what his father wanted for him. And he chose the path of against his father. Instead of being like a prince or in royalty, he chose to live among the poor, and he chose to live a life of spiritual awakening and spiritual fulfillment, as opposed to, I guess you could say, like material possessions and that type of lifestyle. So it gives you a chance to look at the first sermon at Deer Park, and it gives you a chance to look at this legend of the Buddha being tempted psychologically, trying to overcome his temptations to discover his true path in life, his true purpose, and his true goal.
Yep, and you did provide us with some of these sources on the PowerPoint that, again, listeners, you'll have access to in the show notes. So they did a great job of helping you find these sources as well, with links and that kind of thing. So when we move on to step 4, we let teachers know that if they're going to make their own lessons, they need to develop a graphic organizer. We currently have a common organizer that you'll find in every volume of the book series. But did you make any adaptations to the graphic organizer, or use different types of graphic organizers for the Groundhog Day lesson or any lesson in the book?
Yeah, excellent, Scott. Thank you. Several of our authors adapted the lesson depending on what they were looking for in the activity at the end. But yeah, it's all the idea of this comparison and contrast of the film clip, the story that's being told, the primary and secondary sources. So in some way, those comparing, contrasting, creating a dialogue is always present in all the lessons. But some might take it as an essay, some might do a project, some might have a rubric for some type of presentation in the way of presenting that. But all offer that initial idea of that Hollywood or history graphic organizer to kind of, bring your thoughts, bring your evidence, start comparing evidence, having the students really dialogue about primary sources, secondary sources, and what they believe that the director of this film is portraying in the screen. Some are close in reality, like some of the documentaries, but some of the other films that we may have selected might be a little more of a challenge, more abstract in their comparison. But it at least gives the students and the teachers the opportunity to start that dialogue.
And I think that goes back to earlier, the question about audience and grade level. The cycle of reincarnation and relating that to Groundhog Day, I would imagine is going to be a lesson for a secondary schooler, 11th, 12th grade, while some of the other chapters have film clips from a 10 Commandments, a classic film, that may be modified to a 7th and 8th grader, the lesson, and it still may work. So it depends on your audience. It depends on the the knowledge base. It depends on the student's maturity. There's a lot of variables that come into play when you kind of decide how well this could or could not work for the audience in your classroom.
Great. So finally, when we get to step 5, we actually get to show students the film. Yay! After going through all this process. And again, due to copyright, we unfortunately can't show the film clips that you selected for this podcast, but you certainly can find links to YouTube, or if you have a actual hard copy of the movie, there's some timestamps, that kind of thing. And I did mention earlier that you did provide a link to some of the clips. But is there any way y'all could describe some of the clips that you selected for Groundhog Day? That would be the kind of the focus of the lesson.
Yeah, go ahead, Adam.
Sure. The clip that I found, it wasn't from like a timestamp, as opposed to a clip I found on YouTube. There was a compilation of scenes kind of put together to kind of show like an overarching theme of the film. And one of the pieces that we have to understand, and when Phil begins to realize he's reliving the same day, he doesn't immediately become like altruistic. He doesn't immediately become this wonderful person. The first thing he does is begin to be very selfish and starts to take advantage of people because he feels like that he's omnipotent. He feels like in the scene, I think he says that in a discussion with a colleague, he says he's not the God, but he is a God.
Yeah, I remember that scene. Yep.
You know, so he doesn't immediately have this awakening. And I think that's good for people, for students, or even for even adults, and using this type of clip and any type of formation of learning world religions, that some of this process of the human story, the human condition, it doesn't happen overnight.
Mhm.
It takes a while to learn and to grow and to develop. And I think that clip that was selected shows that he begins very selfishly taking advantage of this power he thinks he has. And then he realizes as time goes on that no matter how much power he has in the story, he's still stuck in Groundhog Day, and he still has to relive the day over and over and over again. And slowly he starts to do things for other people. He notices that there's a child who falls out of a tree. He's climbing a tree and he catches them. He changes the tire of 3 old women who are in their car that's broken down. He walks into a restaurant where he knows a guy's going to be choking and gives him the Heimlich maneuver to save his life. So he slowly begins to realize he can use this power that he perceives he has for good to change the people's lives in Puxatawny, as opposed to selfishly taking advantage of them for his own gain or his own pleasure.
Mm-hmm. The other thing I'd like to add to that, Scott, is that when the individuals are going to read our volume, we offer options depending on how many days of the class they want to use this. So if you're interested in using the whole film, that will take multiple days. So we have maybe a 5-day lesson that you could use. If you want to just use it one day, we might have a film clip that they could use as well. So some of the activities are going to be variable based on the time that they have in the classroom to incorporate these lessons. But we wanted to make sure that the teachers had the ability to adapt to whatever needs that they had. So some of the activities will be, one day you might have a 3-minute clip or 2 3-minute clips. You might have a documentary that's 14 minutes long, or you might decide that the whole film was worth it and then talk about it in the context and have a larger assignment that's based on that. So there is some variability with these assignments.
So off topic, Phil did learn how to do ice sculpture. He did learn how to play the piano. Any skills that you'd want to acquire if you had 10,000 years or so to learn?
To play the piano or some type of musical instrument would be pretty cool, and having that chance to do that over and over. That comes to mind. What about you, Tom? Anything?
Oh goodness, I don't know. That's a tough question right there. Oh,
I can't remember. I looked online once at the theory about how many days he really lived in that experience in Groundhog Day. I don't remember the amount of times that he relived the day, but the number was beyond what you could imagine.
Yeah. Well, if I did it, it'd probably be golf, and I'd go from a 18 handicap to probably a 16 handicap after 10,000 years. That would be my goal. So, all right. Well, step 6, we have our teachers read the secondary source. Now, we do recommend a lot of times that the simple textbooks that you have in your schools would be a perfect secondary source to use because they're condensed. They talk about your topic, etc. But there's obviously a million secondary sources you could use. Is there any particular secondary source about Groundhog Day? I know you mentioned it a little bit that you would like to discuss.
You mentioned that the textbook is a great great book to use for that. There's a lot of different books out there that teach world religions from different Catholic publishers. So from my experience, that's what I have used. But I'm sure there's other textbooks as well, not designed for a Catholic school, that would do a wonderful job as well. But yeah, using the primary source as his sermon, and then a secondary source in a textbook, just to make sure you understand the vocabulary. A lot of times students struggle in a world religions class with the terminology is so different, and the spelling of some of the terminology is different. In the case of Buddhism, some of the terms and concepts from Buddhism are similar to Hinduism because the Buddha was raised Hindu. And it might be the same word, the same spelling, but the Buddha gives it a new definition. So then it becomes even more confusing. You might have a term the same that the students may think, oh, that means the same as what it was in Hinduism, and it may or may not. So the textbooks that we've used in the past do a good job of making sure you understand the basic vocabulary just to even be able to dive into a course on a specific religion. A lot of times the spelling of some of these words are obviously originate from different languages. So I've always leaned into, if there's any type of quiz or test that deals with vocabulary, I always give them a word bank because some of the spelling of these words are so foreign to them. I would rather them understand the concept and how to analyze it or apply it, as opposed to taking off points because they spelled something wrong. I think that's, I mean, some would argue the opposite, but I feel like that works well.
Yeah. And just a reminder to the teachers out there, obviously, if you use a primary or secondary source, you can certainly put that source through some sort of program that will help change the reading level for your students. But as Sam Weinberg said, that, you know, if you do that to a primary or secondary source, you still need to have the original source text with it. And that keeps it a primary source, especially for primary sources written in, translated, et cetera, et cetera. But you certainly just do want to have that original text if you can, but you can certainly change it to meet the reading needs of your students. Same thing for the primary source. You've already mentioned your primary source a couple of times. But again, every lesson in your book, you do offer the teacher readers a list of primary and secondary sources they could use, correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And one of the things to remember is that it's this point that really starts developing that critical thinking aspect for the students. So helping them understand what was going on at the context, time, culture, history, really brings it into reality. So those primary sources are extremely beneficial to really get the depth and the evidence to help them understand how to compare and contrast. Because if they only see just the film clip alone, they don't have the context to really engage in that dialogue and conversation. So we wanted to offer multiple primary sources, multiple secondary sources, as well as various resources that you could continue to learn about the topic as the instructor. What else could you bring into the classroom? And there are some activities that allow the students to look for additional secondary sources to bring into the conversation as well, and compare and contrast the clarity of those sources. So it's an excellent structure to help them really engage with primary writing, secondary sources, and that dialogue of bringing it all together.
Yeah.
The hope is that it's seamless, that an educator could take the lesson and the volume and have it be ready-made to use in the class. They may need to think through whether or not they're going to use this for, as we mentioned, like maybe 11th or 12th grader, 7th and 8th grader, depending on their audience. But for the most part, it should be ready-made for the educators in the classroom to use the lesson.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, exactly. And again, so you know, these lessons, they're highly detailed. Any teacher could just grab it from the book and certainly teach it as is. But we certainly encourage any educator to adapt the lesson as they see fit to meet the needs of their students, right? But we give you a good, solid template to work from if you did want to use, for example, Groundhog Day to study tenets of Buddhism, for example. But you can do it step by step, or you can change it however you want to do it. And that's a commonality between all the volumes in the series, especially with your book. So then we get to step 8, where we basically have the kids decide to answer that question: Hollywood or history. And again, just for our listeners, Hollywood just means everything about this movie is inaccurate, fake, whatever you want to call it. History in this sense, but it can certainly be social studies, would be, everything is accurate. It's like, you're seeing all the full tenets of Buddhism in Groundhog Day, or obviously somewhere in between. Now, we want to get our students to use the primary and secondary sources to come up with their own conclusion, and support their ideas using evidence. But what we're going to do in a second, because we may have non-teacher listeners who just may want to think or want to hear what you think about the accuracy of the film is. So we'll hold off on that in a second, but do note that what we want our students to do is they want to go through those sources and come up with their own conclusion based on this continuum, Hollywood or history. Even with movies like we're going to talk about, down the road, Pocahontas, there's still some elements, some kernels of truth to these films, but obviously they vary based on quote unquote artistic license of the director, producer, that kind of thing. So we'll talk more about what you think when it comes to the actually the film in a moment. But step 9 is to find the conclusion. And again, we've talked about in prior episodes that we can use things like the line of contention, where you basically draw a line on the board: 100% history, 100% Hollywood, 75% history, et cetera, where students come up and they stand where they think the film falls in that continuum. There's the 4-corner approach, where you have students, basically put a sign on one corner of the room saying 100% Hollywood, 75% Hollywood, 50% so on, where kids can all get up and stand at the corner where they think the film falls. But can you tell me, did you do anything different for this particular lesson plan about Groundhog Day, or do you recall any from the book that stuck out when it comes to this concluding piece?
Or I'll speak about Groundhog Day first, and Tom, if you want to jump in about maybe another example. Similar activity, not exactly the same as you mentioned, it is called, and maybe it's called different things for different educators, camps and fences. We have to choose a camp. So, for example, is this Hollywood or is this history? And the fence would be people would stand in the middle of the room. The camp would be on either side of the room, similar to the 4 corners you mentioned. So it's good to get students. The typical way is like show of hands, raise your hand if, or raise your hand if not. But to get them to, attach another sense to their understanding. So by physically moving, having a conversation. So if we were to do camps and fences and say 100% accurate or 100% inaccurate or in between, not just the physical movement, but once you get to your camp in the classroom, or Scott, as you said, the 4 corners, let's have a very mini conversation with 2 or 3 people in that same part of the classroom first, to build some confidence, to build a similar vocabulary before you share with the entirety of the class. So similar to the 4 corners, but I've used camps and fences for a lot of activities when I want students to kind of pick a side, if you will,
Right.
and then discuss that. And there's also, for the student who maybe isn't engaged or in the material as much, or maybe who has just been absent, it gives them a good chance too to kind of learn what they may have missed. And if they're on one camp or one side, it doesn't mean they have to stay there.
Right.
Or if they're in the middle on the fence, if they feel as if the conversation continues, they feel like they want to shift. I think that's part of the learning process as well. They may have heard an argument or defending a point of view that it speaks to them. And sometimes the students learn more from each other than they do from the teacher.
Right.
The students may learn it or hear it in a different language, a different tone, and it speaks to them. And that's the learning experience, as opposed to presuming that they're going to understand everything that comes out of the teacher's mouth.
Right.
Absolutely. And there's different ways of doing this. I mean, you have the Hollywood or history organizer at the end of each lesson that you can jot down your notes for that evidence and the specific quotations or whatever it is you'd like to use. One of the activities I've used with some of these lessons is allow the students to go in groups and become their own director. So if they were to recreate this story, how would they make it more accurate to the primary source instead of the vision of the director of the film as well? So put them in that role-playing situation and create a scenario where they can respond in a way that shows the knowledge that they've learned and demonstrate that in a project or creating a video or some very brief experience that puts them in that role of discernment.
Right.
One thing I did as well, not specific to Groundhog Day here, but And using film over the years. One class specifically, I think it was 2 school years ago, asked me if they could create a project where they look up different films and try to relate it to some concept in class. Now, this was not a world religions class; it was specifically about sacred scripture and Christianity, but they really got into the idea of how do we see the concepts of what we're learning in media in the world, not just in a textbook, not just in a classroom during the school day.
Mhm.
So, not given it was their idea, but they said, can we look at films and try to relate it to other things that we have learned? And I think that was pretty cool that they took the initiative and wanted to try that. Now, did every student do it extremely well? No, but that's okay. The idea that they were trying to seek lessons or truths or concepts in their world that's transferable and it's not specifically in the textbook in the classroom.
Yep. Yeah. Great. So, even though we really want our students to be the one that comes up with their own conclusions about all these film clips, how accurate they are, not accurate using evidence, right? We may have listeners who just really like Hollywood film, really like history, or social studies, and they want to know from the experts. Y'all are the experts. So when it comes to Groundhog Day, using the same continuum, 100% history, everything about Groundhog Day, talks about the tenets of Buddhism accurately, sorry, Hollywood, everything about it is inaccurate or fake, or somewhere in between. Both of y'all tell me your thoughts. Where would you think Groundhog Day falls on that continuum? Go ahead, Adam.
Okay, I didn't know who was going to start. Okay, so very tough question. So to go back a moment before I go forward, obviously I'm sitting here in front of the backdrop of the Shire. So it's an easier argument to make from Tolkien's work that implicitly puts themes of his faith into the story and fuses them in a way that's allegorical, that it requires the students to study it to find tenets of their Christian faith. So in that framework, I would say that someone like a Tolkien would definitely be on one side of that continuum. Going to Groundhog Day, which was not written or to my knowledge or directed to teach Buddhism, I feel like it's not going to be specifically based on Buddhism, but the creativity of the instructor to challenge the students to think critically about how they see Buddhist concepts within the film. So if I was a student in my own classroom and I had to participate in a camp and fences activity, I would definitely be in the middle.
Mhm.
Because I would see that there are some aspects that are very much related to Buddhism, but I would also be aware enough to realize that this is a comedy
Mhm.
and it's supposed to get the audience to laugh and have a lighthearted look at Phil's life, and not supposed to be as serious as studying the Buddhist religion. So I would put myself in the middle if I was a student in my own classroom.
There is a lot that Adam's saying that we can learn allegorically. But comedy, talks about truths through exaggeration. So I would probably be more towards Hollywood than I would history.
Mhm.
But it's one of those situations that it's a springboard for a conversation. And I think those examples of suffering, those focuses on the ego, those focus on the change of character, does a good job of explaining it, but helping the students realize that, again, this is one director's perspective
Mm.
of the story in this hero's journey, I guess, in some ways, how he changes in this conversion experience, might look very different in a religious setting, in a philosophical setting. So I'd lean a little bit more towards the Hollywood side than I would history, but that's
I
where
would- Yeah, that's great, Tom. And I would think that if I'm doing this lesson in class, and we're doing camps and fences, Hollywood versus history, and if the students all go to the history side,
Mhm.
Mhm.
I failed them in trying to understand how this film opens a conversation for Buddhist concepts. Um, Obviously, that's why I think that if we look at this and offer it to 11th, 12th graders, where
Mhm.
the brain development of an adolescent, the ability to critically think is more honed and more developed, I think it's a better opportunity than maybe say 6th, 7th, 8th grader who, in their brain development, they're still more literal and they may not see or even be able to participate well in an activity of a Four Corners or the Continuum or Camps and Fences because they just don't have enough experience or knowledge to make that distinction.
Right. But then that's what we're hoping to teach, right? We're hoping that, we can teach critical thinking skills through the use of films, but for them to apply to everyday life, whether it's, voting, going through campaign ads, buying a new car compared to a used car, heck, deciding to go to college, major in philosophy or go, get training in a discipline like plumbing. You have to make all these critical decisions. And what we try to do with the book series is really help hone that brain function, to get kids to be able to make these critical decisions in every aspect of life. We just use film because let's not lie, it's more fun.
Absolutely. I think our hope with the whole volume is we wanted to include film and stories that would create a dialogue.
Right.
And so it's not that the students are going to be right or wrong.
Yep.
There's not necessarily right or wrong in this situation. It's how well can you support your position and your claims? What is the evidence that you have? So our hope is that each of these lessons will challenge them to think about the topic in the curriculum in a unique way.
Yeah, that's great. And so just to kind of conclude a bit, obviously we want to give credit where credit's due. Every lesson's based on a series of, sources, primary sources, secondary sources, websites, that kind of thing. So we do provide the viewer or the listener with our PowerPoint, some of the references and materials that you used for the lesson plan. So those are available. But let's talk about something even more fun. It's time for plugs or anything to promote. Someone tells me that y'all have another book coming out in the Hollywood or History series. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, we do have another book, and this is more Adam's brainchild, but I'm glad to be part of it. This is using comic-based stories to help teach liberal arts and social sciences. So we're looking at the genre of the comic book franchise, Marvel and DC. We're looking at some graphic novels, and how can they engage this conversation again through the standards and create a dialogue. And these might be a little bit more on the Hollywood side than they would history, but again, our hope is that it creates a dialogue with something that the students may be familiar with, and how can we bring that back to the curriculum and help them go deeper. Adam, you want to continue?
Yeah, I mean the popularity since I guess the mid 2000s, 2005, 2008 with DC films such as The Dark Knight and then Marvel Cinematic Universe. I mean, it's a great opportunity for us to take the popularity of such stories and storytelling to recognize these films are based on comic books storylines that were created, maybe 50 plus years ago or even sooner, and then try to use those and weave that into how to teach anthropology or history or religion or philosophy or psychology so they can study these characters, the character development, the themes and storylines, and how do they relate to events that really may have occurred in human history and American history. Case in point, the films in the X-Men series, the characters of Charles Xavier and Eric Lyncher, Magneto, are loosely based on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X and both of their approaches to in the civil rights movement for inclusion, for diversity of a society. So the students can use comic book story lines, especially in X-Men, to understand the civil rights movement and American history in a more fun or maybe engaging way to characters they already know. And sometimes the students may know more about the concepts, but they just understand them from a different perspective, a different point of view, maybe from a graphic novel, as Tom shared, or comic book, or even a film. And if we can tap into their prior knowledge, then we can open that up to themes in history and psychology for them to understand a little bit further.
Yeah,
Yep.
some of the activities and lessons, like using the Joker to talk about bullying and consequences of bullying, stages of grief, WandaVision. So what are some of these psychological, with science, we talk about the Hulk and radiation. So it's going to be kind of a broad volume, but engaging the students through conversation that they're familiar with that comic-based image and those film clips.
Yeah, definitely. That's what I was going to say. It's like, no offense to myself or some other authors, but this is not Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. These are films that kids watch, they love, they have a connection to. So I think this makes it just such a important new volume in the series that I think any classroom teacher can bring these lessons to their classroom and really get that student buy-in because again, Marvel makes billions of dollars for a reason. DC makes maybe a little bit less than billions, I don't know, than Marvel for a reason. But yeah, I think these are a great book. And again, not to tell the audience how the sausage is made, but I do a soft edit on every book in the series before I send it to the publisher. And this was just an absolutely amazing book. I really enjoyed reading it, giving y'all comments on it. And I think it's going to be so relevant to students who again have this love of comic book based movies. And also I want to mention that it will be either your book or another book. Two are coming out about the same time. That will be our second volume with our new publisher, Emerald Publishing, which we've discussed in the introduction. And that again, that Emerald has now is now the publisher of these books. They were published by Information Age Publishing. Emerald acquired Information Age, so they are now producing these books. So if you want to, check out both the World Religion book and the comic book as well, or comic book volume, then you can certainly check out Emerald Publishing or anywhere you can purchase books. So great. Well, I really do appreciate you all joining me today. For the audience, if you have any questions about Tom and Adam's World Religion book or comic book or anything about Hollywood history, please send any questions to the Hollywood history email, which is basically hollywoodhistorypodcast@gmail.com. I can send your questions to Adam and Tom. If you have any questions about their lesson plans or certainly anything again about the Hollywood history series in general, once again, that is hollywoodhistorypodcast@gmail.com. Tom, Adam, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on to talk about both of your books in the series. And I look forward to what you have in store in the future.
All right. Thank you, Scott. It's been a pleasure to be here.
Thank you for having us.
All right. Thank you so much. And cut.
Hollywood History volumes are now published by Emerald Publishing out of the UK. All volumes can be purchased on Emerald's website or anywhere books are sold. If the innovative ideas discussed in the podcast have led you or a family member to consider earning an undergraduate or graduate degree in education from Central Michigan University, we encourage you to review the links in the show notes or contact host Dr. Scott Roberts at rober4s@cmich.edu. We offer undergraduate degrees in general and special education at the elementary level, secondary disciplines including social studies, and graduate degrees in curriculum and instruction, instructional technology, literacy, health and PE, and special education. We also have accelerated teacher certification programs for those with undergraduate degrees in something other than education who want to become excellent teachers in the state of Michigan.